Anyway, seriously, ignore the criticism. Most of the time when people criticize anything about the Horizon games, especially when they try to say something objectively untrue like the visuals not being that great, etc., it's almost always just some kind of excuse to hate on the game without actually saying that they hate queers and want Aloy to look like a sex toy. Horizon Zero Dawn has sat high atop my own personal, unbeaten pile of shame for years now. It was an absolute juggernaut on the PlayStation 4 and remains one of the most enduring, successful, and important franchises in the Sony catalog to this day. Not only was the base game a success, but it spawned another massive sequel, a LEGO game, a VR game, board games, a comic, an in-development feature film, and Aloy herself has been featured in Monster Hunter and Fortnite. It's a franchise that has been truly growing by leaps and bounds over the past 8 years. Ever since its release in 2017, I've tried a small handful of times to beat the game. Usually I got around 30 to 40 hours in, about halfway through the main story, and had every collectible and campfire on my map. Usually my collectible and exploration binge would wear down my resolve for the game before I reached the credits. I'd always enjoyed the game, and whenever I restarted it, I wondered why I'd quit in the first place, only to hit the same walls some hours later and drop the game once again. That all changed a few weeks ago when I booted up Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered and took the time necessary to 100% the main game and nearly do the same for the Frozen Wilds expansion. My experience over my 65 to 70 hours is a wildly varied one. Like a pregnancy, my excitement at the beginning of the playthrough was high. It all felt new, and I was running on that novelty and the prospect of what was ahead. Like this fabled pregnancy, my journey continued and the morning sickness and inconvenience of the whole ordeal began to set in. My enthusiasm was beginning to be greatly curbed. Finally, the game came to term and I delivered it whole, complete, and I was ecstatic. The pregnancy analogy really breaks down here because my enthusiasm was not over what I'd just done or the shiny new 100%, it was because I didn't have to bother with the game anymore. It was done and I could abandon it. I guess I take that back. People abandon their kids all the time, so the analogy still works, but the point is, my joy completing the game was not derived from where it should have been, how much I enjoyed it. Now, I want to be clear up front. This video is first and foremost a critique. I didn't love this game and I think it's good to look back on it and verbalize why, both for my own gratification, as well as the validation of other people who may not have loved it either. However, with that said, my opinions or lack of enjoyment of this game do not mean it is a bad or poorly made experience. No matter my personal feelings toward it, I do believe it's a labor of love with a killer concept and engaging gameplay. The fact that the bad outweighs the good on my personal scale is absolutely not to suggest that Horizon Zero Dawn has no redemptive value. I think it does, and I'm glad that so many people have derived so much enjoyment from the franchise thus far. However, like most popular pieces of media, it feels like the good is praised and the bad is generally glossed over, which makes a person wonder if they're insane for not liking it. No, you're not insane for enjoying Horizon Zero Dawn, but neither are you for disliking it. Dear listener, if you've just completed this game and are searching the internet for someone to express what it is that puts you off from such a popular title, I hope to do a good job of expressing those things. To those of you who love this franchise, you're welcome here as well. This is a safe space. Additionally, you can tear me to shreds in the comments and tell me I hate women. Of course, it must be stated I have not played Horizon Forbidden West, and I am aware that some of my issues regarding the first game, especially those in relation to the story, have been slightly amended in the sequel. In a sense, this critique is made in a vacuum and is not intended to be a blanket statement on the entirety of the series. Lastly, a word on spoilers. I will keep the first half of this video relatively free of story spoilers. I will of course be talking about gameplay mechanics and basic story elements, but I'll make sure that you're aware that spoilers are incoming before I get into the story itself. Gameplay and visual spoilers will be shown through most of the video, so be aware. If you don't want robots and locations spoiled, feel free to simply listen to the video like a podcast if you want to avoid that. Let's kick things off with the game's visuals. My assessment of the visuals is from the remastered version. My other 3 attempts at beating the game were from the original PS4 and PC ports, but I think the remastered's visuals are uplifted in nearly every way. To be clear, the original was spectacular for the time, but it has quickly begun to slip in my opinion, particularly in the facial animation and character model department, though the rest of the game suffers in other areas. Pop-in, stiff nature animations, and some poorly aged textures are much improved in the remaster, and pound for pound, this is an excellent looking game. The sun rays are some of my favorite from any recent experience I've had. Climbing up a hill during a sunset with the sun blasting light rays through your skull at 3 trillion lumens is both exhilarating and beautiful. Sunrays aside, the lighting is vastly improved in the remaster, and environments feel so much more alive than the original. The PlayStation 4 Horizon Zero Dawn had a cold, impersonal, and lonely feel to the world, but the remaster makes everything vibrant and adds contrast that feels warmer and more inviting. The way grass and foliage sway with the breeze is much more dynamic, and the world's reaction to Aloy's movements is far better than the first, which helps to add to immersion. The butterflies and other ambient creatures that populate some areas of the game are more dense and better modeled and animated. The particle effects and explosions feel more natural and less cartoony and choppy. The robotic creatures feel more fluid, especially in 60 or 100 FPS PC Master Race, and the models are sharper, more sleek with less of the sort of glow that concealed the more intricate parts in the first release. As far as character models, in my opinion, they're much better. They're beautifully done in the remaster, and the animations during dialogue are greatly improved. Facial textures and cold or sweat effects look great. Aloy's face gets flushed in the cold and damp in the wet swampy areas. The faces still feel a little stiff during dialogue, but it's a night and day difference between this game and the original 2017 version. Perhaps the best compliment I can pay to this game's visuals is that you can feel its beauty. There are some games, like the Demon's Soul remake for PS5, that has its praises sung as being one of the best looking games on the console. But while it's technically impressive to be sure, for me it has never felt like a great looking game, nor has it blown me away with moments of beauty. The Horizon Zero Dawn remaster has and does. It is a stunning remaster, and it's worth $10 if you either want to replay the game or are playing it for the first time. Quite frankly, the improved facial animations alone are worth the price of admission. So clearly my issues with the experience do not lie in the visuals. Let's move on to something a little more concrete. As previously stated, the facial animations in the remaster are greatly improved over the original, but unfortunately, no matter how good the animations are, if the words being spouted from your beautiful characters are inane, boring, contrived, obnoxious, absurdly on the nose, or downright stupid, you're probably going to hate the people saying them. Further, if the voice actors delivering these inane, boring, contrived, obnoxious, absurdly on the nose, or downright stupid lines butcher them like a Glinthawk butchers a metal corpse, it will make your immersion and enjoyment of the world and story a task higher than a tall neck. Oh, sorry. Did that last cringe-worthy sentence make you want to throw yourself headfirst into an empty well? Maybe you should tell that to the writers of Horizon.
This beast doesn't have a story yet. Too heavy to carry, eats metal like a snap maw.
Just take a load off and avail yourself of some Karja booze until someone sniffs out the trail. Then watch us seek out our prey, straight as a Ravager's shot. Zip!
The lines delivered here by Aloy, the main characters, and other NPCs are ham-fisted on-the-nose millennial writing that makes jamming sharpened rebar into your ears seem like a preferred exercise over listening to more dialogue encounters. The issues with these lines range from clunky story exposition and forced metaphors, as you heard previously, to an unending amount of lazy sarcasm and lines that don't match characters' personalities.
Well, 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 an outcast on my doorstep. All mother protect me.
Surprised you saw me the way you keep looking every other direction to make sure no one's watching. Careful there, or you'll sprain your neck.
It's always a pain in the neck when you show up, girl, one way or another.
I've calluses older than you.
I have calluses enough if you want to test me.
She sparks. I believe it, Flamehair.
I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of anything.
Really? Confidence is quiet. You're not. I hunt a stormbird. I haven't seen any in the cut.
That's right. But one roosts back near Freeheap. How about a break from all this white? I'll meet you there. What? People expect you to hike for miles, hunt huge machines alone, and just bring stuff back?
Mostly.
Not me. I'm fierce.
Are you still here? Wow, you must be fierce. Now look, I have a lot to say on Aloy's character and personality. So much, in fact, that I'm going to save the bulk of it for a dedicated section of the video. How cool is that? Love that for her, right guys? Sorry. Putting those clips together has got me writing sarcasm in my sleep. Now, one of the jobs of NPCs and quest givers in a video game is to give you quests and explain what is going on in the world without saying these subtle parts out loud. Directly addressing the world and its mechanics feel forced and inorganic. In Horizon, characters verbalize every part of a situation, how it makes them feel, what you need to do about it, the broader impact on the world if you don't, not to mention what kind of equipment you should use for the mission, and making it clear that you as Aloy could approach the situation any way you please because you have personal agency after all. It's a mess, and attempts at emotional moments are all too often lost in a sea of sarcastic bile spewed by Aloy or blatant and manipulative calls for sympathy that land as gracefully as a cinder block on an infant's skull. The rule of show don't tell is likely the one that is broken more than any other in this game, and I'll come back to it for nearly every topic that I discuss today, so we will move on from that aspect of the dialogue for now. When the characters I bumped into weren't bludgeoning me with their over-exposition, they were boring me to death with their lengthy, mundane stories and uninteresting anecdotes. I have to mention, the game allows for you to skip nearly every available follow-up question in the dialogue tree, which will save you from much of the bloviating. Additionally, you are able to skip through dialogue as it is spoken and jump past cutscenes. These quality of life features are all incredibly important. By the last 15 hours of my playthrough, the ability to simply select the glorified, I don't care about anything you have to say, let me shoot dinosaurs, dialogue option, helped reduce my frustration down from the full list of side effects on the back of a bottle of antidepressants to low grumbles of irritation and disbelief, with the occasional mutters of, dude, I don't care, please kill yourself. Admittedly, my antisocial frustrations are more complex than the characters themselves, which leads us into the side quest that Horizon is so kind to pad out your playtime with. Side quests are important in open-world video games. This is not controversial. They help expand the scope of the world, they give purpose and context to people, places, and civilizations. They open new items and areas to explore, and they can help the player level up and gain experience. However, these sub-missions should be fun, creative, and engaging. Horizon Zero Dawn's side quests often feel derivative, formulaic, and occasionally fun for approximately half of their runtime. The formula for a Zero Dawn side quest is as follows. Talk to an NPC with a quest marker. Groan at the over-exposition. Learn that someone they care about has gone missing. Skip to the end of the dialogue, run or fast travel to the location marked on the map, use your focus to scan the area, investigate the suspicious things in the area by interacting with them, follow a trail using your focus, investigate another area, follow the trail using your focus for a second time, repeat this another time or two, then fight a person or machine. Quest done. Except you do have to fast travel back to the quest giver and talk to them to complete the mission. Now, I realize there are many games that are effectively the same in their mission structure, minus the focus nonsense. However, what those games tend to have in addition are characters you care about, and a story for those submissions that feels marginally more important or impactful than the choice between painting your room white or eggshell. Like I said, I couldn't be bothered to be concerned with these people's problems, and apparently neither could Aloy for the most part. Removed from any story engagement, these missions just stacked one on top of another and blended together. The side content is split between errands and side missions, a distinction that I think was unnecessary and silly. It may be controversial, but I'm a firm believer you can have short and long side quests without having to name them something entirely different. I genuinely believe that if the roster of side content was cut in half, the game would be stronger for it. Just take the 10 best side quests and the 5 best errands and put them all together under one tab. Another frustration of mine in regards to these side quests is the inevitable way in which they cast the entire world of Zero Dawn and its population in a light of pure cartoonish incompetence. These side missions heavily utilize Aloy's focus device, which could be used for some very interesting applications, but instead is simplified down to a below-average Assassin's Creed Eagle vision that you are forced to use in order for Aloy to perceive the simplest things. In one mission, she's tracking a gang of suspicious individuals suspected of a murder. A search party has already been through to investigate in an attempt to find bodies, but they had somehow managed to miss a singular set of deeply imprinted wagon tracks with a blood trail going up the hillside. No, it of course took Aloy and her focus to notice the visceral carnage on the ground and follow the single most obvious track in the history of video game tracks. It feels like the focus was originally introduced as a plot device, but for it to allow Aloy to do the things she needed for the story, they had to also allow her to utilize it outside of missions and cutscenes, so they simply copied and pasted the same system from a dozen other games and called it a day, while not realizing how silly that makes all the other characters who are apparently incapable of actual basic human perception and comprehension. Wrapping this around a side quest once again, this leaves me talking to a character I do not care about, who is feeding me a story about someone vanishing, a story I've, by the way, heard a dozen times already, so that I can run over and use my focus to quote-unquote investigate a tipped-over basket of fruit while Aloy can drop some metal line like, "Looks like somebody tipped over a basket of fruit. I'll bet it was an accident," strokes chin, after which I follow a blatantly obvious trail that nobody except Aloy is capable of seeing due to the 5G radiation having cooked their already smooth brains, and finally arriving at the end point where I can shoot some arrows and skip some more dialogue. Look, it's not as entirely bad as I make it out to be. Some quests are better than others, and the moment-to-moment gameplay of combat is good, but the bulk of the side quest content in this game I come away from not caring about. I want to be clear, I did exhaust all the dialogue trees at every opportunity until the last 10 hours or so of my playthrough. I truly did give it a shot and tried to be engaged in these miniature stories, but eventually the issues with writing an inevitable mission formula wore me down to the point that I did indeed throw in the towel and abuse the skip key. There is one part of the game that you certainly are not able to skip, however, and that's the gameplay. The bulk of Horizon Zero Dawn is found in its moment-to-moment gameplay, which consists primarily in the 3 C's of combat, climbing, and crafting. We will tackle these one by one, starting with the combat itself. Now look, this is what kept me engaged and interested in the game. It's exceptionally well done, it's fast-paced with a good learning curve, freedom to experiment and learn, with satisfying feedback and decent enemy variety. I greatly appreciated the spread of bows for different tasks and the way that more elemental damage methods were unlocked as you buy and upgrade your weapons. These weapons vary from simple bows to tripwire and sling-thrown elemental grenades. A full inventory of weapons allows for all kinds of experimentation, and most weapons take some time to figure out. Creature designs help complicate the combat, and for the first dozen or 2 hours of the game forces you to make your encounters more intentional. One of the only useful features of the focus is the ability to scan the robots and learn the locations of their elemental vulnerabilities and weapons. The exploration and discovery of new varieties of robots was one of the best parts of the game. Hiding out in a bush while scanning every weak point on a behemoth, prioritizing an order of attack, then equipping all the right weapons before sliding into combat is exhilarating. Each new creature offers a slightly different battle that requires a slightly different cadence of shots and dodges from Aloy. The bows are a blast to use, and a mid-game upgrade that allows for more than one arrow to be notched at once really ups your destructive power. Movement during combat scenarios is fast and fluid, slides and dodge rolls are very well done here and feel excellent. All of this makes for a really fast, frenetic first half of the game. The skill tree is also really solid and impactful for about half of its duration, with really meaningful and game-changing upgrades. After these key upgrades, though, a lot of it is really boring, and prioritizing mediocrity means that interest in continuing these upgrades drops, and skill points are liable to stack up unused if you're not paying attention. The first half of the tree really is excellent, though, and ultimately, this is a secondary component of the game which doesn't drag down the combat loop. So all this sounds great, and it is, but there are problems. The first minor issue I have is the crafting of ammunition. And again, I want to emphasize this is a very, very minor issue. By the time you get to the end of the game, you're firing 3 arrows with nearly every shot, because why not? It does more damage. Well, this drains your quivers very quickly and forces you to craft lots and lots of arrows. It isn't difficult to do this, especially if you crank up the radio slow motion feature, but at a certain point it just feels like excessive busy work and a feature that is there to simply be there. My solution would simply be to allow more quiver upgrades for bows that have the most commonly used arrows. Allow for 100 to 150 hardpoint arrows. That way you can make it through a big fight without having to craft them 3 or 4 times. A separate quality of life feature that has been included in the remastered version of the game is the ability to turn on automatic resource pickup and disable the pickup animations. This is a borderline necessary feature, and I can't imagine playing this game to 100% without it. Secondly, a much bigger problem. The leveling and or damage figures in this game feel fundamentally mismanaged. In my playthrough, I headed up into the Frozen Wilds around level 40. The game was still pretty tough on occasion, and the Frozen Wilds did a good job of handing me some challenges and new enemies to knock me around. 15 or so hours later, I emerged from the Frozen Wilds at level 60, with brand new endgame weapons filled with excellent modifications to pack a major punch against the best that the lower elevations had to throw at me. With a little less than half of the base game to go, I initially expected there to still be some challenges. But nothing the base game could throw at me from that point on was remotely challenging, and I quickly lost interest in fighting things, which was what had kept me playing up until then. Now here's the thing, I say the leveling felt mismanaged. I could have turned the difficulty from hard to very hard, but I don't believe simply turning down your damage and making enemies punch harder is really the best solution to this. The reality is, new enemies continue to shake up combat and create new challenges, whereas killing the same enemy types becomes easy, more based on familiarity than pure damage figures. I think having a steady stream of more difficult enemy types as you progress through the story would do much more for keeping me interested than simply making the game harder only for difficulty's sake. Doing so would continue that addicting loop of hide, scan, play, and attack that I loved so much for my first 40 or so hours. Speaking of hiding, Horizon does have stealth, and it is existent. It's totally passable and fine, but there's absolutely nothing fresh or original about it. You can engage in stealth combat with the robots or human enemies. I will say the robot stealth is substantially better than human enemies. The animations for Aloy taking down a Watcher or Scrapper is really neat, and rolling between cover and kill while taking out an entire flock of grazers is pretty cool for a few hours. After a while, though, it does become apparent that the animations are a little too long and you're better off just shooting everything in sight or lobbing a few elemental payloads into the center of everyone and everything. This is especially true of bandit camps, which feel like a total mess. These feel like the custom levels I would create in Far Cry, where I would slap a bunch of structures on the map and scatter enemies everywhere, like dumping out a bucket of green army men. The camps are entirely possible to stealth through, but it's obviously the least efficient way to clear one. The best method is to get all the bandits to form a useless DC protest mob and follow you so you can throw the aforementioned firebomb into the middle of their pathetic assembly. These bandit camps are really boring, and the human combat in general is really dull, feels super janky and ironically robotic, which is an unfortunate change of pace from the excellent fluidity of the actual robot combat. I'm gonna be real, to mess up outposts is a pretty impressive thing. I can't think of any game in which I've actively avoided taking them on, but the ones on Horizon are the gaming outpost equivalent of eating a stale, untoasted English muffin. Finally, let's have a word on climbing. I don't want to weigh in too heavily on the yellow paint debate, but I do have a few things to say. For one, yellow paint is intended to allow the player to identify where they're able or intended to climb. That's it. There's just one. The problem is, there were not an insignificant number of times playing Horizon Zero Dawn when I was genuinely confused where I was supposed to be going and the yellow paint was indistinguishable from other unusable handholds. This led to a number of frustrating deaths. The idea that there is a random assortment of perfect handholds on only one particular side of a mountain or structure is of course silly and requires a suspension of disbelief, but I'm happy to make that suspension for Uncharted, and I'm happy to do it with this game as well. What I'm not happy to do is the amount of climbing that this game requires. Now I get it, climbing things is now a bona fide Sony hood classic. Every game from the Sony Cinematic Gameverse now requires climbing in order to be greenlit by first-party leads. But dang, there's a lot of it, and it just doesn't feel as good as Uncharted. It feels more clunky and convoluted than this video's script. The reality is I don't hate the climbing in Horizon, and I don't hate that it exists, but I do hate that there is so much of it, and it's also rigidly structured. Certain games like Breath of the Wild have acknowledged the idea that its game's protagonist being able to climb almost any surface is no more silly than the idea that every structure has a random, perfectly curated climbing path to the top, and a protagonist who can launch themselves into a 10-foot vertical from a penny-sized handhold in the side of a mountain. It all requires a suspension of disbelief, but one option is a far better gameplay choice. Speaking of suspensions of disbelief, however, let's move on to a big one: the story of Horizon Zero Dawn. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is, as promised, your spoiler warning. From this point on, until the timestamp in the description, I'll be openly discussing the plot and characters in Horizon, as well as spoiling the main twists and turns. If you haven't played Zero Dawn and want to avoid this or just hate me and want to leave now, please do so. Okay, let's dig in. I actually love the concept of this game and the story that it tries to tell. I also think it's mostly successful. However, the things that are weak really drag down the entire project in my mind. Let's do as brief a recap as I can, in case it's been a bit since you've heard this tale. Our lead for the duration of the game is the tepidly written bag of sarcasm, Aloy. She's an outcast from the Nora tribe, a primitive and superstitious group of people who are corralled and required by religious beliefs to remain in the sacred Nora lands. These lands are believed to be protected by a deity they refer to as All-Mother. Now, Aloy is an outcast from birth as she has no known mother, and the matriarchs of the tribe cannot agree on what to do with her when she appears inside of their sacred mountain. She's raised by a non-biological father figure known as Rost, who is also an outcast, though for other reasons. Aloy grows up under his instruction and learns how to fight and survive, with her ultimate goal being to compete and win in a competition called the Proving. If she wins the Proving, her title of outcast will be removed and she will be accepted into the Nora tribe as one of their own, and may be able to have the opportunity to learn about the mother that she never knew. At one point in her childhood, Aloy finds herself in a cave full of ancient, technologically advanced ruins. These ruins and the technology they contain are strictly off-limits to the Nora people, being known as the Ruins of the Old Ones. In her exploration of the cave, she discovers what becomes known as a focus device, a small, triangular device that is mounted on the user's ear and is intended to provide information and other assistance to the user. Rost allows her to keep it, but not happily. Years pass and the training continues. On the day of the Proving, she meets a number of new characters, including two men named Olin and Erend. The two men are from a hardy tribe known as the Oseram, who have settlements outside of the Nora lands. Aloy notices that Olin also has a focus device, the first person she has ever seen aside from herself to own one. This piques her interest and she attempts to talk to him about it, but he's evasive and impersonal. We now cut to the Proving. Aloy wins, and moments before her crowning as said winner, the entire group of young Nora braves is attacked by masked assailants who kill most of them. These men are also equipped with focus devices, and using information from one of them, Aloy realizes they are intending to target her specifically. Rost, who is watching secretly from nearby, saves Aloy from certain death, but dies in the process. Aloy wakes up inside the mountain in which she was rumored to have been born. In a move of desperation, the Nora matriarchs give her the title of Seeker, which means she may move in and out of the Nora's sacred lands without consequence. From this point on, Aloy travels the land, meeting all new tribes and people, fighting all manner of robotic creatures and attempting to uncover who the attackers at the Proving were. This leads to a number of branching narrative paths that all feel fairly small in scope in comparison to what's to come. In her search for answers, she inevitably gets caught up in family dramas with characters like Erend. These stories, while mildly interesting at times, tend to feel like distractions from the main narrative. Through some investigation, Aloy discovers that Olin, the bristly Oseram with the focus, who she met before the Proving, is responsible for revealing her location to the attackers. The tribe that massacred the Nora Braves are known as the Eclipse, and they forced Olin to work for them by utilizing threats against his wife and son. The Eclipse serve an entity known as Hades. Now I could continue to delve into character lore, but let's cut to the chase, shall we? By the end of the game, Aloy has uncovered far more than she could have ever anticipated. This entity known as Hades was intended to be a subordinate AI function of a larger AI structure known as Gaia. Gaia was created many years ago by a woman named Elizabeth Sobek. She, along with many other highly intelligent people, created Gaia and all of its many subfunctions in response to a cataclysmic world-ending disaster. Ted Faro, a very wealthy robotics manufacturer, created a line of self-replicating, peacekeeping robots that subsisted off of biomass as fuel. People, plants, you name it. If it was alive, the robots ate it. Faro lost control of the robots and they began to replicate uncontrollably, putting the world on an estimated 15-month clock until it was entirely barren and impossible to survive. It was in response to this that Project Zero Dawn was created. Boiled down, the idea was to create an AI with the capability to re-terraform the Earth and bring back human life after its inevitable extinction. Gaia, the overarching AI, had many subordinate functions, such as Hades, whose purpose was to wipe out the planet if Gaia made any mistakes in her recreation. That way, she could try again until she got it right. All of the robots, with the exception of the Peacekeepers, are creations of Gaia to help transform the world back into something habitable. As long as all this explanation was, it truly is face-meltingly fast and a brief summary of the events and ideas in Horizon Zero Dawn. However, it allows me to address things a little more directly, and with more context behind them. So let's hop in. Firstly, tribal stories. These are the stories that revolve around the game's various tribes and their interpersonal or political drama with one another. Everything from murder to theft is represented here. The reality is that everyone's enjoyment of these stories will vary dramatically. I'm not going to suggest they are objectively bad or boring, but I will argue that the writing of these characters, as I have already discussed, began to wear me down to a point that substantially affected my enjoyment of them. I liked the idea of the tribes more than I liked the tribes themselves, or cared about their issues. The problem that created for me was the fact that it wasn't until the third act that the truly interesting story unfolded. All the details surrounding Ted Faro, Elizabeth, the machines, and Project Zero Dawn. I don't think the placement of the stuff is a problem with the game or its writing. After all, it's effectively the game's twist, and it wouldn't make sense to have it at the beginning or middle of the story. It's just that in comparison to everything else before, it feels so mundane, and the characters put me off massively. However, like I said, I think this is the part of my critique that is the most purely personal, and I won't spend too much time on it. I will, however, spend some time on the twist in Project Zero Dawn itself. Again, I think this is by far the coolest part of the story, and I found it genuinely very fascinating. But let's break it down. Project Zero Dawn, the brainchild of Elizabeth Sobek, a self-sufficient AI to rebuild the planet literally from the ground up after the extinction of the human race due to the Pharaoh robot invasion. We are told repeatedly throughout the game that this is truly the only possible way that humanity can be restored. Every other option has been investigated, found lacking, and discarded. The game has some dialogue from recordings that discuss the possibility of hacking the robots or brute forcing the access key to terminate their processes. Perhaps sending a rocket into space to establish a colony elsewhere. We are told that hacking is an impossibility as it would take too long. Additionally, these robots are the alpha hackers and would counter-hack any machines or computers attempting to override them, which, I mean, it just sounds silly on its face, but let's go with it. We're told that brute forcing the access key would take far longer than humanity had left on Earth. We're also told that the Apollo spaceship exploded and no follow-up efforts were made to start colonies on other planets. Horizon truly does make an effort to enforce in your mind that Project Zero Dawn is the absolute only way to save humanity. The problem is, I just don't believe it. What I'm about to explain next is perhaps one of the most pedantic over-analyses of a video game that you've ever heard in your life. But once I thought about it, I couldn't stop, so just go with me here for a moment. These Pharaoh robots are seemingly invincible. The story tells us that an all-out war against them would never work. There are simply too many of them and they're multiplying too quickly. This would be easier to believe if these machines weren't so comically weak. Now, these Peacekeeper machines can be taken down with a handful of arrows shot from a recurve bow. Aloy kills dozens of them. As a matter of fact, they are some of the easier large enemies in the game. The Deathbringers have large exposed heat vents in their body that deal massive damage to the robot when struck with arrows. Now, the game wants us to believe that there is no military solution that could wipe out these total pushover Peacekeepers. Yet the year of the outbreak was 2064. We've had heat-seeking weapons since World War II, but the weapons required for these robots are not missiles, nukes, or bombs of any sort. As a matter of fact, strapping a firecracker to a pigeon and watching it fly into a heat vent would be enough to obliterate one of these machines. All that would need to be created is a low-impact projectile that's split into dozens, hundreds, or thousands of little heat-seeking heads. These heads would take down the robot numbers by hundreds or thousands every single minute. Again, I must remind you, we have this technology in the current day, and it's substantially more overpowered than would be needed for this situation. Even if we didn't, am I truly supposed to believe that it would be far easier and more time efficient to create the single most powerful, fully self-sufficient AI with 9 unfathomably complex sub-function AIs running under it, the capability to last hundreds of thousands of years without error, requiring an impossible amount of coding on untread technological territory in the massive metal structures and facilities to do the AI's bidding, than it would be to get some top engineers together to create a new rocket with the damage output of an aggressive firecracker, capable of splitting into multiple heat-seeking heads? I just can't. In fact, I can't even describe the AI's capabilities without a massive run-on sentence. Practiced professional video game studios can't create a game in 5 years without glitches, bugs, and other issues. Explain then how Elizabeth and her team could make Gaia in a little over a year with no bugs or errors. Genuinely, it's a crazy absurd thing that we are told all of these other solutions would take far too long to develop, when the solution settled upon is likely the most convoluted, highly advanced, expensive, and insane solution that could possibly be conjured. Looking for answers to these questions online, I often simply found people saying things like, "Did you even play the game? The swarm was unstoppable. End of story. Project Zero Dawn was the only solution." As if just reciting the on-the-nose rejections as found in the game somehow solves those problems. There really aren't any concrete answers, and the answers that do exist rely heavily on blinders and suspension of disbelief. The difficulty in accepting the story as it's told and suspending my disbelief in this particular aspect of the narrative is the fact that the gameplay itself blatantly contradicts what we were told by Elizabeth and others. These robots are absolute pushovers, and it's really hard to look past that. Now look, I understand the development of a missile would still take time, assuming it didn't already exist in 2060, and the longer it took, the more destruction would be waged on the Earth and its population. Further, there are still issues that could be raised with the idea itself. However, if we go down the path of poking holes in theories and solutions, no solution seems to be more unlikely or more full of holes than Project Zero Dawn. But let's zoom out just a little bit and look at everything from a less granular and ridiculous lens. The truth is, this is still a really cool and a really complex concept at the core of this game, and it's the reason I had any interest in the story to begin with. Without the over-analysis, it is possible to look past this stuff, but I would compare the Project Zero Dawn story to the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. It's incredibly ambitious, quite complicated, and genuinely impressive, but it's really hard to just ignore the naked babies. In Horizon, these naked babies aren't plot holes, they are simply unexplained questions that are really difficult to look past. I'm aware at least some of the things that I mentioned are addressed in even major plot points in the sequel. Speaking of which, if you haven't already rocketed down to the comments to leave an angry correction informing me about these things, try and be careful to label them as spoilers for Forbidden West when you do. I told people I would spoil Horizon Zero Dawn, not Forbidden West. Either way, general character writing aside, this was my biggest gripe with Horizon's story, but I'll not belabor the rest of my problems because they are even more niche and frankly less important or impactful on my enjoyment of the game. But speaking of enjoyment of the game, we have to discuss her. So get ready to call me a sexist misogynist because it's time to talk about Aloy. You already know I have issues with Horizon's characters. I've mentioned it a few times already. From their dialogue to delivery, I find a lot of them severely lacking and often downright insufferable. The thing about these characters, though, is that you usually only have to sit through their miserable whinging once or twice, but with Aloy, well, you'll have to suffer through her vindictive, bitter victim bellyaching in every interaction. Harkening back to Aloy's upbringing, it would make sense that she would harbor some resentment. In fact, the way she's been treated by the Nora for the past 19 years and the pain and loss she's suffered are often cited as justification for her behavior. If I'm being honest, I don't think it's entirely unreasonable. Most people who have been shunned and belittled like Aloy has often end up as unlikable and snotty as she is. The issue is that Well, I don't want to play as that character. It doesn't matter what she's been through. I don't want to see others, outside of the Nora tribe, who have done nothing to her, treated like they are obnoxious distractions and needy losers. At the end of the game, Aloy finds the site of her mother's death, and there is an audio file played in which Elizabeth Sobek, talking to Gaia, quotes her own mother, saying,
Being smart will count for nothing if you don't make the world better. You have to use your smarts to count for something. To serve life, not death.
Elizabeth then goes on to talk about who she would want her child to be.
If you had had a child, Elizabeth, what would you have wished for him or her?
I guess I would have wanted her to be curious. And willful, unstoppable even. But with enough compassion to heal the world. Just a little bit.
The implication of both of these clips are intended to point to Aloy herself. They suggest she is smart and compassionate, and it is out of this wisdom and compassion that she wants to make the world a better place. To be clear, Aloy is smart, or at least as smart as her focus makes her. Further, she is making the world a better place, but her treatment and behavior towards a large number of the people she runs into during the game suggest her actions aren't out of compassion towards them, but rather self-preservation, personal enrichment, and her desire to learn more about herself. As a character, Aloy is all of the worst parts of Marvel sarcasm without any of the mediocre humor.
Fernand, my eyes are up here.
I'm looking at your spear. It's magnificent, but how does it work?
You stick the pointy end into the machine.
Yes, but how does it turn foe into friend?
It's simple, really.
Yes?
You wouldn't understand.
I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of anything.
Really? Confidence is quiet. You're not.
When you initiate side quests, she lets the sarcasm and passive-aggressiveness roll in spades, subtly or openly mocking who she's talking to. Some people have proposed that even though Aloy is snarky and rude, she still helps people, which is a compassionate thing to do. But, for one, side quests are entirely optional, totally reliant on the player's agency, and secondly, I got the impression that if I didn't do these side quests or errands, Aloy wouldn't care at all. After all, they were just distractions from learning about her own past. In some cases, Aloy would explicitly ask for payment before agreeing to fulfill someone's request. It didn't matter that a person's life was in danger, she wanted to make sure she secured her bag before she helped those in need. This isn't doing good for compassion's sake, this is doing good for profit. Now, there are scenes where Aloy vocalizes the kind of compassion and wonder for the world that the game wants you to believe she embraces, but they are few and far between, and she inevitably slips back into being bitter and snarky after the scene is over. The problem isn't that Aloy is frustrated or has personality flaws, the problem is that she's almost entirely consumed by these flaws to the point where she has little redemptive value other than her actions. Do I think Aloy's a morally gray character? No. In the context of the game and her actions, she's clearly good and obviously of vital importance, but she's just so unpleasant. While her actions are good and heroic, there is very little that is redemptive about her personality. She isn't fun to play as because her words do not match with what you as the player want to convey or put out to the world. You don't want to make passive-aggressive and degrading comments to every person in need unless you're the Aloy's the girl boss, then just don't take
Barks.
from no one train, which is just a brainless and lazy way to excuse her unpleasant personality. Good character writing does not create perfect characters, but it should create compellingly flawed characters who are likable in spite of their shortcomings. I feel that Aloy fundamentally fails at this. Her compassion doesn't shine through. Her self-interest and impatience with others does. It doesn't matter that it's more realistic she would be rude and standoffish because the Nora treated her poorly for so many years. It doesn't save her from the fate of simply being a messy, unpleasant protagonist. As a player, I want to save the world, but I often get the impression that Aloy is only willing to go as far as it takes to save her own skin. Now, there's one more thing in particular I want to address about Aloy, but that requires a slight shift in tone and focus. So let's take a look at the politics because, yes, they do exist.
It is, but we like arguing. You need hot air to keep a furnace burning. Still, Some traditions aren't up for debate. I would have ended up Petra Forge wife. How do you like the sound of that?
I don't think it fits you.
Good answer. That's why I left.
If you've made it up to this point without closing the video or leaving a "you're a somethingist" in the comments, I'm really impressed, and I'm grateful for your time. If you want to support more videos, drop a subscription. It's free, but it's worth its weight in gold. Even if it's only so you get a notification so you can come and dislike my next video. Unfortunately, I can't waffle around the subject at hand anymore. I considered how to discuss the politics, if at all, in this video, but seeing people suggest there is nothing political at all in Horizon has prompted me to do so. I will try to keep things to a minimum, however. My desire for my contributions on this channel and my content is not to be a continual watchdog on everything political and, quote, woke. I have another video that explains much more in depth my views on all of that, but suffice it to say, I will keep this moderately and mercifully brief. First up, let's address Aloy one more time. I previously made note of the fact that people justify her unpleasant behavior by pointing out her upbringing in the Nora tribe, but this would only partially account for her victim mentality. Remember, the Nora tribe is a matriarchal tribe. Though Aloy was an outcast, she would have been steeped in the understanding that women led her world up until the point that she left her holy homelands. Living in a tribe that exalts women to the highest level of leadership should have some effect in shaping her personality, right? Well, it doesn't. Aloy still has a victim complex about being a woman.
My assistant and my daughter. We seem to get along better as business partners. Her mother wanted me to show her a trade. She started tinkering with weapons. Say, when you need a break from this Banuk carry-on, stop in and see her. You're both, how do I put it?
Women?
No, independent. Look for her at Long Notch.
Has there ever been a Sun Queen?
Many wives and consorts, of course. Or, oh, you mean for the sun to choose a queen? This has not happened.
Why not?
The sun is masculine, of course, and so would choose its heirs thus.
It's a light in the sky. I've never seen anything dangling from it. I don't know if you've noticed, but women run things around here.
Well, Avad took a woman as captain of his vanguard, the first to hold such an honor.
You mean Aaron's sister, Ursa. From what he told me, she sounds formidable.
Oh, formidable indeed. A woman, and an outsider as well.
She might make a fine Sun Queen, given a chance.
A sun queen? Oh, no.
I wish I could have done more. But I am just one woman.
As am I. No need to sell ourselves short.
Oh, thank you, Aloy. I will pray for you.
This is a blatant rejection of the idea that her upbringing shaped her personality. She's a victim all on her own, because the writers of her character wanted to demonstrate how many hurdles she had to overcome, not just as an outcast, but also as a woman. It's unnecessary and so out of line with her lived experience that it can hardly feel any other way than forced. Secondly, I have to address diversity. Horizon is heavily populated by women and people of color. Now hold your horses, neither of these are a problem. The problem only arises when diversity becomes an indicator of morality. I get it, that's a little confusing, so allow me to put it this way. Then we can move on. If a player of your game is able to reliably predict with a passing grade a character's moral alignment or level of hostility towards the main protagonist based solely upon their skin color and/or sex, your game's sliders are off. This is possible in Horizon. And I get it, somehow this makes me the racist and sexist because I noticed, but I would say we're working our way nicely through this classic chart into the, well, yeah, it's happening, but you're the problem for noticing territory. So spare me your tears. But that's it. I mean, there's more, but I told you I wouldn't dwell on this for too long. However, the idea that there isn't any progressive agenda in Horizon is just plain silly. An objective look at the game and the studio who developed it make that plain. You don't have to hate it, but you would be silly to not acknowledge it exists, and I would be silly to stick to this topic any longer than I have to. So let's finally bring this ship in for a landing, shall we? Well, After all is said, what's to be said? I believe Horizon Zero Dawn is an incredibly ambitious game that released at a very opportune time and filled a void in the PlayStation 4 catalog that helped it grow into the juggernaut it is today. It was beautiful on that system, and it's even more stunning in this remaster. Its greatest strength is in its gameplay and the exploration that it provides for the first half of the experience. The story, while fascinating, bends the mind's ability to suspend disbelief if it is considered too deeply. I think Horizon is an excellent idea that is dragged down by its writing and protagonist, both of which are frequently divisive and abrasive. I think in spite of its efforts to refine the common open-world mechanics and tropes, many of them find their way with few revolutions into the final package. The Ubisoft open-world effect has definitely breached containment and seeped into the DNA of this game. I think the politics in Horizon are ham-fisted and worthy of an eye roll on occasion. However, all this said, I still think Horizon is worth a playthrough for the average player. Now, my recommendation would be not to take the game too seriously, don't 100% it, and maybe only do half the side quests. There's a lot of really neat stuff here in spite of everything else that drags it down. Placing all of the good and all of the bad on two sides of a scale would leave the good side a decent bit heavier in my mind. I don't think it's nearly the prestigious masterpiece that many fans see it as, but I understand why they feel that way. If you do decide to play it, I hope you enjoy it that much as well. This is all my opinion, and I would rather somebody enjoy their 40 to 80 hours in a game than I would that they hate it. Just because I didn't love it.